Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special leadership series. This series we're calling the Growth Series. We've got four of possibly media experts talking with us over the next month or 2 months. Today, kicking the series off, we have the great Darren Woolley. Now, I would say, if not the world's, Australia's leading pitch consultant, friend of independence, and one of the nicer and friendly, I'll say, people that we have the pleasure of dealing with. And he's going to walk us through just a quick overview of the state of the pitch report that he's just completed. And then we're going to go into a Q&A session, and you guys get to ask questions, and we'll ask you a few questions as well. So get your questions ready. If you haven't downloaded the report, we sent it out to everyone yesterday. Otherwise, it's also shared again this morning on the closed LinkedIn group for the leaders. So have a look at that. Woolley, over to you to kind of kick things off and give us an overview of this year's State of the Pitch report.
Thanks, Sam. And look, thank you everyone for giving up an hour or 45 minutes of your time today to participate in this. I really appreciate it because I know how busy we all are. So, it doesn't go unnoticed. So thanks. State of the Pitch really started from 2023 when, there was a lot in the trade media, and there continues to be, about how badly the pitch process can be run. And there were calls for, ditch the pitch from Matt. I've forgotten Matt's name. What's Matt's name again? He disappeared after Mutinex.
Baxter. Yeah.
Baxter. Matt Baxter. Yeah. So after Matt said ditch the pitch, I'm sitting there going, well, there's a lot of opinions going on here, but there's not a lot of data that actually says how badly the pitch process is run. And you have to realize from our perspective, we could end up in a bubble, because when we're running pitches, and I hope this has been the experience for those that have participated, we work really hard to, one, make it fair, and two, work towards a outcome that has the minimum disruption or minimum impact on the agencies that participate. So we thought we're running the pitch process as well as we could, but could we learn more? And what was happening for all those pitches that we didn't run? In fact, the thing that's been interesting about this is, one of the things we've found out is that all consultants in the Australian market are running only 1 in 5 pitches. So that means 4 of them are being run either by marketers or procurement. And it's interesting because it's actually about 3 in 10 is from procurement, and about half of them are being run by marketers. So my big competitor is not any of the other pitch consultants. My big competitor is all those companies that think they can run pitches themselves. And as we'll see, and as you go through the report, you find out many of them can't. And there's a few reasons for that. So we did that in 2023 at the end of that, and released a report last year. And then we replicated that again last year, and we'll do the same again this year, starting on the 1st of July, getting agencies to anonymously score the pitch process that they've just been through, whether they win or not, to give us that feedback, because I think it becomes incredibly valuable to be able to provide a quantified voice back to marketers. As we go through today, if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd absolutely encourage you to put them in the chat so that we can address them. And also, I want to absolutely guarantee that after 25 years of doing this, I'm not a person that holds a grudge or any sort of resentment. So don't feel that anything's off limit. I've had all sorts of things like Tim Burrows saying, well, isn't Trinity P3 one big part of the problem in regards to pitching? So, if Tim thinks he can ask that, you can ask anything you like. Where did we get to? Right. This year, so we had year-on-year comparison. In 2024, we got 77 pitches reported. The last one, it was 70 pitches. I'd really like to see an increase in media pitches. So, when I open it up, I'd really encourage everyone. I'll send you a link to it when it's open, because what we've found is that the pain that comes from pitching is because marketers seem to not understand that some very basic things that they could do would make the whole process so much easier. It's not that the pitch process is broken, more that it's being run badly. And when you think about it, it really hasn't changed in 20 or 30 years. Marketers are still going to market in the same way they did last century. The trouble is that what they're buying now is so much more complex and nuanced, and many of the assumptions that may have worked 30 years ago or 20 years ago are no longer relevant in today's media landscape. And yet they don't seem to understand that, and particularly procurement struggle to understand it. In the Australian market compared to Europe and North America, most of the procurement people we're working with are not marketing specialists. They are what's called indirect specialists. And when I've had conversations with them, they seem to think that media is a commodity. And as anyone that's worked in media at all knows, it's far from being a commodity. As soon as you treat it as a commodity, you start losing value. But they don't have a way to be able to assess value, which is why they'll resort to things like buying exercises and look at CPM still, or costs of impression, thinking that buying cheap is somehow buying better, because they don't understand how to quantify that. Really interesting situation. The biggest trend year on year was we saw a significant drop in overall satisfaction from agencies. It dropped from 3.13 out of 5 overall down to 2.99. I think you may have seen in the trade press, I said that's like going from a C- to a D+. The big thing is you've just passed before, but now you're failing. And I think that it's true that things seem to be getting worse, and there's some reasons for that, which we'll cover off later. The report, as you go through it, gives you all of the things that we want from agencies without asking them to reveal who they are or who the client is, though it is an option. But one of the things that we can't do, and one of the things we'd like to do at some point, is be able to do this survey with the clients to really understand what the motivations are. Why did they pitch? What were they looking for? And the like. Because at the moment, it is only one dimension from the agency perspective. That's an important dimension. The thing that we're working on, and very open to any suggestions from people, is how can we make marketers care more about poor behaviour when it comes to pitching? So that's a challenge I'll throw out to all of you. If you wanted to have a think about how can we engage marketers in the state of the pitch so that they start to take on board some of the insights that we produce through that, because I think that's one of the ways that we'll start to see improvement. That's probably an overview from my perspective. Sam, I know you have some questions that you wanted to put to me, and I think that'll probably be the best way of then being able to deliver the detail of the report.
Yeah, okay. So I'll fire off a couple of questions to you, Woolley, and then we'll open it up to everyone else to see if they want to add anything or build off it. The first question we have for you is, what results or data point in the report do you think is the most surprising or even alarming for agencies?
Well, in this year, the biggest one that shocked me was payment terms. It was a significant difference from the previous year, which was back in 2024. Most of the payment terms were around 30 days. There were only a few that were 60 days plus. This year, that swapped around, and now it's almost fully more 60 days than 30 days. And I think that's indicative of the economic situation we're in. The cost of living increases means that many marketers' budgets are not increasing in real terms, and that we saw a trend this year or last year to try and get even more for less. I know that's been a long-term trend, but I think we're seeing marketers try and get more for less by turning agencies into basically their loan account. So that was the biggest one that shocked me. There were a whole lot of other things, but I think if that trend continued, it would make trading conditions even harder, particularly for independent agencies. I know one of the things that annoys me about payment terms is that we've seen trends globally where holding co's, whether they use FX accounts or whatever to offset interest rate costs, but are very often going to clients going, we're happy with 120 days, and then deny it publicly.
Yeah, and we've heard a few of that 120 days, and for cash flow for an agency, that
Crazy.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Were there any findings that confirmed that you already suspected what's happening in the market?
Yeah, look, the one that has been persistent for the 2 rounds is that marketers really struggle with giving honest, open feedback. And in the latest one, one of the agencies, because we asked for commentary, and one of the agencies said, we were told by the marketer we were a close second. So we knew the other 2 agencies that were on that shortlist, and we talked to them, and they were both told they were a close second too. So everyone was a close second. Unfortunately, they did that because they'd actually gone to pitch only to stay with the incumbent. And unbeknownst to everyone, were doing a negotiation with the incumbent to get things cheaper. Now, first of all, that's just deceptive. Telling an agency they're a close second is just copping out of, and when I ask marketers, because I've seen them do it, and I've pulled them up and said, no, they were actually significantly further than close second. Why? I don't want to hurt their feelings. Well, don't lie. I mean, I think we're all professional. If you do it with respect and do it with the intention of helping the agency, it's far better to give honest feedback than it is to try and soften it by telling little white lies. We embrace a process of radical candor, and as long as it's coming from the place of wanting the agency to be better at what they do and learning from that process, I think most people understand that and take that feedback. But marketers really struggle with honesty in feedback. Sorry, I need that to be clear. Yeah, it is a gift.
What are the main factors driving the current pitch volumes and behaviours you're seeing in the report?
So I've mentioned there's economic changes. So that's the first one. Clients are, when they have an opportunity to go to market, are going to market because they think they can get more for less. The problem with that is there will always be someone in market that's willing to offer more for less, at least in the pitch process. And so that just perpetuates that spiral down to zero. The other thing that's driving it is all of the technology disruption. And there's lots of talk, particularly from the, let's say, AI vendors, about how AI is going to save all this money. The marketers are not going to market saying who's got AI and who's going to save money, but they're hoping that when they go to market, that someone will come up with a solution that will make everything, faster and cheaper and better. Pick any one of those. But they're not specifically asking, do you have AI? And it's really interesting because I think what they're hoping is someone will come up with a solution that will solve their budget problem. The other thing is that in that they're also increasingly suspicious about some of the promises that are being made, because we have seen some agencies talk up AI without any proof, only to be appointed, and then a bit like the dashboards of old that everyone used to promise, it never actually materializes, at least in the first 6 months, if not longer. So, there is a growing amount of skepticism about it.
Yeah. Got one here from Phil. Mr. Woolley, very formal. Why are PBR remuneration structures disappearing? We have been asked to remove it from some recent negotiations and expand on PBR.
Yeah. So payment by for performance or payment for results was a huge opportunity, except that people struggle, both marketers and agencies, to define who was actually responsible for delivering the result. Now, there used to be a lot of those in place with very soft metrics like, client satisfaction, and they'd pay a bonus based on client satisfaction. The first blow to that happened during the global financial crisis, recession for the rest of the world, where suddenly marketers were finding themselves paying bonuses to agencies at a time when their own business performance was dropping. It took another hit again during COVID, where if you had that in place, sure, you had a great relationship and the agency was doing a great job, but business was going backwards. So there was a realignment of the measure of performance to be much more a financial or business performance than it was simply a soft metric. The next thing that's happened is marketers really struggle with actually funding a PBR. When you realise that a marketer's given a budget each year, and the upside could be significant if the agency and the marketing program perform well, that then becomes potentially an unfunded liability, because let's say they need to pay a $500,000 bonus or even $150,000 bonus. They can't spend that until the numbers are done because it has to be funded. And so they would rather spend that 150,000 on actually getting something done rather than paying a bonus. So that's another problem. And then the third one is getting everyone to agree achievable performance metrics, particularly when in most cases they were asking agencies to take a cut on their fee, let's say 10%, for the chance to win 15% back. And I used to love talking to procurement people who suggested that. And I said, would you take a 15% salary cut for the chance to get 10% salary cut for a chance to earn 15%? Based on metrics that someone else controls? And they go, of course not. And I go, then why are you offering it to the agency? If there's going to be an upside, it has to be a significant upside, and it has to be one that's achievable. So there's three very strong reasons why they're disappearing, and I think we'll see them disappear completely unless we get to the point that we can actually not only measure performance, but attribute it to where the work's being done. And that's still a long way off, no matter what Mutinex and the MMM vendors are saying.
Yeah, and it's always the creator's fault as well.
Of course.
So next question we've got from James is, how much are clients focusing on trading desks, DSP fees, where indies are at a disadvantage?
Marketers are not focusing on the individual fees. They're focusing on the total cost. What do I get for the total cost of the budget is their starting point, which is why they'll often ask about trading positions and things like that. But they are becoming increasingly aware that there are a lot of often hidden fees because they are downplayed by many people. It's also the reason why we're seeing more and more larger clients taking media in-house, where they have the transparency on this and particularly for the digital, for digital trading, because one, the tech platforms have made it easier for them to take it in-house, but also they feel like they have greater transparency on it. But the actual cost itself is not a big issue unless they're, they feel like they're being gouged on it.
Yep, awesome. Question from Jackie is, are you seeing head hour retainer fees structures being challenged as AI conversations are starting to occur? And do you see media agencies moving to a project costing in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got to thank the AI vendors for this, because they keep going around saying it's all about, you'll need less people. The fact that we actually have still our hourly rates and charge for resources, what we should be charging is value for services. In many ways, the old commission system did that. It put an agreed value for all services at 10% commission, and then you could charge a service fee on top of it. But what we need to do is move to that, because there are increasingly people, consultants and procurement people, looking to, well, if AI can halve the number of people you need to do this work, then we'll pay half the fee. And I've written an article recently, which please look at on our website, because what that doesn't allow for is the upfront investment in the technology. Two is the implementation costs and the disruption of doing the implementation. And three, all of this technology has significant on costs, which would significantly increase the overhead factor. So if someone's saying to you, well, you should be charging half as much because you've got AI, yes, but the overhead just went up by 100% because we've got AI. Is the starting point in that discussion. But yeah, it's really starting to become an issue.
To what extent are economic pressures or internal marketing restructures influencing the pitch decision?
Many marketers will go to pitch hoping to get a cheaper price, but the smart ones are not buying just on price. What they'll be inclined to do is pick the agency that they want to work with and then hope that procurement will be able to negotiate a better position. And this is where I think agencies are either getting training or getting expertise in how to negotiate in those situations is really important, because I don't think it's just a matter of meeting their price expectations. Using pricing, for instance, is a really good strategy, because you can do things like actually offer a tiered pricing structure for your media services of a sort of low, medium, and high premium, on the basis that in that decision making, you typically go for the middle one, except procurement, which always choose the cheapest one.
Crazy.
So I think it's really important for agencies to start to look for ways of managing that process of maintaining price, or maintaining a value price for the services offered. That's the economic. What was the other one? The
internal marketing restructures.
Yeah, and the biggest one I think that's going to impact media, but also has the potential of being an opportunity for independent agencies, is this idea of clients taking their media in-house. And the other thing that we've seen is that as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, it was clients that were spending 10 million plus on digital. Now that's dropped down to 5 million plus on digital. They're starting to think that that smaller investment still makes it worthwhile taking it in-house. The opportunity for the media agency, and particularly indies, is to wrap themselves around and support that, because in actual fact, in many cases, they struggle with the implementation and the management of it. And that would really embed you, because then it's harder to swap out that agency that's become intrinsically linked into that. But that's the biggest internal restructure that we've seen, is that move to in-housing.
Yeah, and obviously that's a hot topic at the moment. We might unpack that a little bit. What are your thoughts on it, and can it be successful, or is it going to challenge the agency sector?
Look, I think agencies that embrace it and make themselves the sort of external partner for the internal agency can work really well with that, because as long as you're very clear, you almost have to adopt not a service provider mentality, but a consulting or advisory mentality, where the more they want, the more they pay. Because the thing that agencies will always bring is a much broader perspective to what's happening in the media market. And I think that is still really valuable. It also means that you can then over time embed yourself in with that client, as I said a minute ago. Does it mean that, is it a threat? I think it's only a threat for those that want to hold on to the way things are. I think if you're able to reframe or reshape your offering so that you're seen as being very, offering a value in that transition and the ongoing management, there's a big upside to it.
Amazing. Got a question here from Shai. Hi, Darren. It feels like brands have a disproportionate amount of power, especially by hiding the amount of agencies in the pitch process and how many there are. It's not being transparent. It becomes a low chance of winning, a race to the bottom of fees, and agencies waste time and suffer during this behaviour. How can this be more reasonable so agencies actually have a positive experience during a pitch process and a better balance?
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you, Shai, on this, because it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask, which is how many people are being invited to tender and what is the process? And if someone says that they can't tell you, that is a huge red flag. Because how can you make an informed business decision without knowing that type of detail? Because you're right, it could be purely a numbers game. If your chances of winning a pitch, if there's only 2 other agencies, is 1 in 3. If there's 20 other agencies, it's 5%. So you need that sort of information, and we tender as well. I mean, I've got 2 big global projects going that I had to tender for, and we always ask, how many people are you inviting? What's the success criteria? What is it that you're looking for and hoping to achieve? And we also ask, and don't always get this, but we ask, what is the size of the prize? What type of value or expenditure would you be looking at putting on? They're perfectly reasonable questions to ask. If you get an answer, you can make an informed decision. If you don't get an answer, you've either got to be willing to withdraw from the process, and I've done that many times, or go into it with your eyes wide open that you're probably going to be dragged through the dirt to get to the other end and largely be unsatisfied. But at least you know that up front and you've made that decision.
Amazing. Next question is, do you think brands are pitching for the right reasons, or are they just still pitching for the sake of pitching?
There's still a large proportion of brands that are pitching at the end of every contract. And in situations where they're very happy with the incumbent, but it's the end of the contract, we have a policy of going to pitch. And we introduced, in fact, Steve Wright developed, and we introduced a process called a commercial review. And so now when a client approaches us and they say, we have to go to pitch, we go, well, are you happy with the incumbent? Yes, we are. Then don't go to pitch. Allow us to do a commercial review of the current situation. It gives them a checklist for both marketer and agency on where the opportunities for improvement. And every one of those we do, we've got Steve's got 100% success rate of the client staying with the agency for another 3 years. We think that's a much better a proposition than going to pitch, because here's the thing, it's very difficult for the incumbent to actually win the pitch when you're going to 2 or 3 other new agencies. And I tell this story. I was in New York talking to a procurement person who said, absolutely, we pitch every 3 years. It's our policy. And I said, are you married? They went, yes. And I said, how long have you been married for? They said, 7 years. I said, well, why don't you go home and say to your partner tonight, look, it's been a fantastic 7 years and things are going well, but I think, I want to date other people for 3 months and then come back and date you. And if you're still as exciting as they are, then I'll commit for another 7 years. And he said, well, that's ridiculous. And I said, no, it's exactly the same thing. When you go to market, agencies are putting on their best, they're putting their best foot forward. They're telling you the best of it. the fact is, if you've got a really high-performing relationship where everyone knows how to work together well, why would you risk that just for the chance of dating some other people for a while? And I think that metaphor works really well, because the number of times that we've seen clients then change agencies in a pitch process when they're absolutely happy with the incumbent, only to then 3 years later change it again and change it again and change it again. The only bright light I've seen is the latest numbers out of the US are showing that when average tenure of relationship between client and agency had dropped down to just under 3 years, it's now bounced back up to about 5.5 years. So there is a trend towards longer term relationships, because I think longer term relationships are more productive, invariably.
Are the holdcos getting challenged more and more by transparency levels around their media buying or principal media trading structures?
Oh, haven't we all heard? There is no principal media trading in Australia. No one's heard of it, apparently. At the Future of TV, that was a statement from the stage. Look, there is definitely, there's two things working against them on this. One is the head offices are very happy to report every quarter to the investors how their profits are being driven by the media divisions and the use of principal media trading. And locally, they will say, oh, yes, but that's overseas, that's not here. But clients are aware of that. And yes, there is definitely a greater discussion around transparency. And I think that's the thing. I wrote a piece in Campaign just this week, it was published, but we have to be careful because there is such a thing as too much transparency. I think what we need to do is to not just talk about being 100% transparent, but the amount of transparency that's needed so that both sides, both marketers and agencies, are able to do the best job that they can. And that's not necessarily being 100% disclosing. And, I've seen over the last 20 years, agencies that are completely disclosing about their fees and resources invariably end up getting screwed. So I think, that's why moving to a pricing model is a much better idea.
Going further down the disclosure conversation, what is the purpose of not disclosing or disclosing who's in the competitive set? If we are X agency and they're a Y specialist agency, or would you or could you decline to pitch?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure if we know X agency is specialist. What? Look, you always have the option to decline, and there's ways of doing it. If you think that the pitch is not framed in your favour, then the way to do it is to actually articulate to the client or the procurement person that you are seriously considering withdrawing from that process up front, and state why. That you don't think that the way they're framed or that you've been told they're selecting agencies would give you the best chance of winning, and that would then be a waste of time. We need to start thinking about these relationships as business relationships, and for marketers and procurement teams to understand that you're running a business, particularly for indies. Most of the people that are running network agencies in this country are employees, whereas the people running indie agencies are the owners. And so having business type discussions about what looks like a successful business relationship, I think is incredibly valuable. One, it shows that you're not just there to be a servant to the client, but two, it then shows the business acumen and knowledge that you bring as a indie business owner.
Amazing. Another one here. In a recent pitch, from one anonymous member, in a recent pitch we participated with a pitch consultant. We were told the media agency commission would be on a rebate back to the client in exchange for an annual retainer fee, which was based on a cost allocation resource and expected to be below the media agent commission. Is this common practice?
Very common in the past, but now they're moving more and more to just a fixed fee for services that's almost project based. Yeah, the commission is largely now supposedly being returned or rebated to the client and then getting paid fee for service. If you've got clients that are allowing you to keep the commission, that's great, as long as you just need to be sure that they're aware of it. Because we've also had clients that as they've grown, the way the business was taken from the incumbent agency was that they've said, you're paying commission, and the client's actually not been aware of it. I know that seems ridiculous, but in this day and age, there's a whole generation of marketers that actually don't understand how the commission system worked or works.
Yep. What is the biggest pain point for pitch process right now for both clients and agencies?
Okay, the biggest pain point for clients is actually knowing what's available to them in the marketplace. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of pitches where clients will say, well, we just want to see what's out there, which is the worst way of actually seeing what's out there. I think you'd be far better just phoning a number of agencies and having some casual meetings without wrapping it up as a pitch to really start to understand what's in the marketplace. But as soon as you put it into a pitch, it becomes almost artificial in the competitive nature. So finding better ways of finding agencies, such as a consultant, is a good way. As long as the other thing that's happened in the US, and I just want to share this, is there's been a big controversy because of the number of consultants in the US that are charging agencies to be on their database or on their list. So basically they're getting paid, and we're talking, significant fees of $10,000 to $100,000 a year, almost to have them broker the opportunities for you, which doesn't happen as far as I know in this country. It used to happen, or charging agencies success fees. The biggest issue for agencies, I think, is the fact that they're often being put through incredibly laborious processes without any indication of the size of the prize. And that goes back to that question before. You should ask, what's the budget, or what are you planning to spend in the next 12 months? Or, what is the scope of this, and what's it worth to you, are all good questions to ask, because then you can make business decisions about whether it's actually worth participating in the process. And I think what we've seen since COVID and trying to operate from a lockdown situation is business owners have become much more aware of the impact the pitching has on the agencies. While it can be very positive when you have wins, we largely are relying on people within the agency to take on additional work on top of the work that they're already there to do. And that can have significant impacts on things like mental health and just, and physical health. So, it's important that we get that message across to marketers that, sure, you can run a big pitch, but the upside has to make it worth the agency's while.
Yep. Isn't a little bit off script as well, but we've had conversations about in the past 5 or 6 years, the shift towards independence and being more in favour at the moment. Are there any tips or recommendations that you can give to indies and to the members around how they can be more successful in pitches, and what you've seen as when you kind of oversee this? What are their superpowers? What are their Achilles heels? What tips can you give them?
Yeah, look, the most of them are things that you probably already know, but the first thing is to pitch with you very clearly being the owner. And one of the things is that you will still be there in 3 years' time, and you will be the person that oversees the business ultimately, while you'll have other team members on a day-to-day basis. And that, there is a point of responsibility. Literally the buck stops here is always the situation. That's the first one. That's the ultimate thing. The next is to make them realize that beyond planning and buying media, there's also the opportunity of what that means. And so, what that client means to the business. And don't be ashamed to say, you would be our third largest client, or you'd be, in our top 10 or whatever. And that makes you incredibly important to us, because you're making a personal connection and a personal commitment. And that is certainly much more powerful than someone saying, oh, well, because they come and go.
Yeah. I think we've discussed that you'll always get an indie founder or owner on the telephone if something goes wrong.
But not so sorry, Sam. I just want to also add to that. Yes, absolutely. But the other thing is that what we find is indie owners are inclined to also be the one on the telephone when, oh, I read this today and I thought this is a great opportunity for you. Because indie owners are running their own business, so they're thinking about their client's business as well. And it's interesting, the whole idea, one of the major reasons that marketers will want to go to pitch is that they'll say, oh, my media agency is not very proactive. And you talk to the agency and they go, well, we put all these proposals to them. Yes, but that's sales. Proactivity between a media agency and a marketer is looking for opportunities for that marketer that's not just about spending more media money, but actually opportunities that could drive that bigger business opportunities for that marketer. And I think that's really important. And I think indies as business people do that really well. And it's something that you should play to.
We do know that it's not always rainbows and lollipops on the side. What's the Achilles heel, or where can we do better when we're up against a bigger agency?
Yeah, so it's interesting because a lot of marketers in Australia don't fall for that whole network thing. Most of them have been around enough that when the big agencies are saying, we've got this network and we can tap into it globally and get all this information, it rarely happens. Mind you, the network clients are more inclined to go with network agencies, only because the idea of it's easier to manage from a global or regional perspective. So it's very difficult. There's a huge obstacle for indies from procurement run pitches, and that is when they come to risk mitigation, they see smaller agencies as greater financial risk. And with the economic situation at the moment, they're concerned about, how financially viable are you? Can you take longer payment terms? No. So it's usually the financial parts of those. Having said that, if you've already won the hearts and minds of the marketer, most of those financial things can be overcome through negotiation. But if you're in a situation where it's all just being decided on paper, it's very hard to beat.
Woolley, thank you so much. I think we've come to our 45 minute. You've got to go and fix your hair to your next function. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. Fascinating. I felt like this could have gone for a couple of hours, actually, with people talking and throwing in their questions. For those members who are going to Cairns on Monday at the cocktail party, we'll have Stephen Wright there. Feel free to corner him and ask him as many questions as you like as well. I can introduce you to him. So he'll be attending our cocktail party on the Monday. Thank you, leaders, for attending today. This is the first of 4 series, so stay tuned for the next one. Next ones, they should be in your diary. Woolley, thank you so much for your support for the independent sector and your insights today. Very, very, very helpful for us. Thank you. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Thank you, mate. That was really good.